Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto was betrayed by Kakashi, saved by Jiraiya, and backed by Kurenai, Tsunade, Ayame, Anko and his mother Kushina. Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Patience. It was a shinobi's most vital weapon, second only to strategy. At least, that's what Kakashi Hatake had always believed. But after a full month of training Naruto Uzumaki, he was beginning to question the limits of his own endurance. Kakashi sat slouched in the shadowy corner of the rusty kunai, a weathered tavern tucked between training grounds and barracks, popular among Chunin and Jonin looking to unwind. Lanterns cast a warm, flickering glow across the cracked wooden beams and aged walls. The air was thick with the scent of grilled meat, old smoke, and sake, enough to dull the senses, though not nearly enough to soothe his nerves. Muted conversations drifted through the room, punctuated by the occasional clink of glass or bark of laughter. Kakashi barely registered any of it. One gloved hand cradled a cup of sake, half-finished and wholly ineffective, while his other rested on the table beside it. His visible eye was narrowed, staring absently at the slow rotation of the ceiling fan overhead. How could someone be so consistently terrible at the basics? Throwing kunai wasn't advanced. It wasn't even intermediate. It was the first thing students learned in the academy. And yet Naruto had a way of missing his targets so profoundly, it almost seemed deliberate. As if the boy was aiming for the trees just to make a point. Even Sakura, who had spent more time pining than practicing, could hit a target with decent consistency. Kakashi's eye narrowed slightly at the thought. He wasn't annoyed by the mistakes themselves. Mistakes were natural, even expected. What grated at him was Naruto's complete disregard for form, for discipline, for the very foundation shinobi training was built upon. The boy fought like a wild animal, spirited, sure, but completely without technique. He could take a hit. That much was true, but Kakashi had known many shinobi who could take a hit. Most of them were dead. Pain tolerance wasn't a substitute for skill. It was a crutch, a dangerous one, and then there was the constant need to show off. Kakashi let out a quiet breath through his nose, placing the cup down with a soft clink. He could still see the ridiculous stunt Naruto had pulled earlier that day, flipping off a tree branch and nearly landing on his head, all in an attempt to impress Sakura. Sakura, who had rejected him more times than Kakashi cared to count. Why bother? He muttered under his breath. At least Obito had known when to quit, eventually. Rin had never needed to punch him to knock sense into him, though she'd been tempted more than once. But Naruto, rejection only seemed to make him more determined. Like a fire that only burned hotter the more you tried to stamp it out. His thoughts drifted, reluctantly, to the one student who didn't make his head ache. Sasuke. Out of the three, Sasuke was the only one who approached training with any real focus. Cold, methodical, determined. There was a darkness to him, yes, but it was a familiar one. It reminded Kakashi of himself, years ago, before the war had worn down the sharp edges of his youth. Training Sasuke was, in a strange way, like slipping into an old rhythm. It was easy, natural. Then there was Sakura. He didn't dislike her, not really. But her attention was often split, too much of it wasted on sighs and sideways glances at Sasuke, not enough on her jutsu. In some ways, she reminded him of Rin. Thoughtful, soft-spoken, always watching. But where Rin had learned to balance her heart with her ambition, Sakura hadn't found that line yet. She had potential, she just hadn't figured out what to do with it. But Naruto. Kakashi exhaled slowly, running a hand through his silver hair as if he could smooth away the headache brewing beneath his scalp. The weariness weighed heavier now, more bone deep. Naruto was nothing like his father. The thought came unbidden, and it struck harder than he expected. A dull ache settled in his chest, something between regret and reluctant disappointment. He shifted in his seat, the old wooden chair creaking under his weight. The low murmur of the tavern faded to a background hum, swallowed by memory. The fourth Hokage had been a natural. Sharp, graceful, commanding. A man who lit up every battlefield he touched, whose presence turned fear into hope. Kakashi had looked up to him, not just as a mentor, but as a hero. And Naruto. Naruto couldn't even complete a leaf-balancing exercise without falling on his face. It was almost funny, if it didn't sting so much. His thoughts were dragged back to that afternoon, a fresh memory still simmering in his mind. Another D-rank mission, another test of his patience. The cat again, Tora, that insufferable little beast, and another round of bickering between Naruto and Sasuke that turned a simple retrieval into a full-blown spectacle. He could still hear Naruto's voice, loud, indignant, utterly convinced of his brilliance, as he argued with Sasuke over the best way to catch the animal. As if either of them had any real idea what they were doing. The worst part, they were starting to get under each other's skin. And that was dangerous. Kakashi closed his eye and pinched the bridge of his nose. The sake was no longer helping, it never really did. I should have just taken Sasuke as my apprentice, he thought bitterly. This whole team is a mess. Naruto's a mess. Kakashi, you look like you're about to fall apart. The voice was soft, tinged with playful concern, but it cut through the haze in his mind like a kunai. He blinked, glancing up just as Kurenai slid into the seat across from him. Her dark hair caught the golden light from the hanging lantern overhead, and her crimson eyes studied him with a quiet, perceptive intensity. Asuma wasn't far behind. The Jonin pulled up a chair with his usual casual air and set a fresh bottle of sake on the table with a faint clink. A cloud of cigarette smoke lingered around him like a cloak, drifting lazily toward the ceiling. Long day? Asuma asked, though the smirk tugging at his lips and the look in his eyes made it clear he already knew the answer. Kakashi didn't sit up. He only leaned forward, resting his chin in his hand, the weight of exhaustion clear in the slope of his shoulders. Long month, he said flatly, the words edged with dry sarcasm. The dim tavern light cast shadows across his face, but even behind the mask, it was obvious he was unraveling. His usual air of calm detachment was starting to fray at the edges. Beneath the stoic exterior, frustration simmered, quiet, sharp, and constant. The dull thrum of chatter filled the rusty kunai, the voices of other shinobi blurring together in the background. Laughter erupted from a nearby table, young Chunin celebrating a completed mission. Somewhere behind the bar, a kettle whistled. The room was alive, warm, and steeped in the familiar smell of roasted meat and burning tobacco. It should have been comforting. Instead, it made Kakashi feel more isolated. What did I do to deserve this team? The thought was bitter, surfacing before he could suppress it. He wasn't the type to indulge in self-pity, and he rarely entertained regret, but tonight, it lingered. Persistent, nagging. Things would have been simpler if Naruto wasn't his responsibility. If he'd been given a different team, or better yet, if he'd only taken Sasuke as his sole student. No shouting, no stunts, no irrational declarations of becoming Hokage shouted from rooftops. He looked down at his cup, the amber liquid inside catching the light. With a soft sigh, he reached for it again. Maybe another drink will help, he thought, though even that idea felt thin. No amount of sake could dull the kind of exhaustion that came with leading Team 7. Not the physical kind, but the mental toll of herding chaos, ambition, and teenage hormones wrapped in ninja headbands. And worst of all, they were just getting started. The rusty kunai pulsed with the easy rhythm of late-night chatter and shared exhaustion. Lanterns swung gently from the beams above, casting warm, flickering light across rough wooden tables and shadowed corners. The scent of grilled pork and sweet dango mingled with the earthy smoke of Asuma's ever-present cigarette. In the far corner, a pair of chunin clumsily played cards, their laughter echoing too loud for the hour. But Kakashi barely noticed any of it. The din of the tavern dulled to a low hum beneath the pressure building behind his temples. The warm buzz of sake in his system did little to ease the tension coiled tight in his shoulders. He swirled the remaining liquid in his cup, watching the ripples move like thoughts he couldn't smooth out. Across the table, Kurenai's voice carried lightly over the noise as she brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "My team's fine, really," she said, though her sigh betrayed more weariness than she let on. "But none of them are suited for genjutsu. Not surprising. They're all buried in their clan techniques. It makes sense, but still." Kakashi offered a noncommittal nod, eyes still fixed on his drink. Asuma exhaled a slow stream of smoke, a lazy grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Could be worse," he said, the cigarette dangling from his lips as he leaned back in his chair. "I've got a Nara who wants to sleep through life, an Akamichi who treats training sessions like snack time, and a Yamanaka who's pretty sure fate's punishing her for not ending up on Sasuke's team." Kurenai gave a light laugh, the kind shared among friends worn down by the same burden. Kakashi didn't join in. Their complaints sounded manageable, mild, even, nothing compared to what he dealt with. He tuned them out, letting their conversation drift into background noise as he leaned further back in his chair. The cup in his hand was cool, comforting in its weight. He stared into it, as if the pale liquid could offer some kind of answer. "If only I could say the same about my team." Every word, every frustration Kurenai and Asuma voiced sounded like surface-level nuisances compared to the hurricane that was Naruto Uzumaki. Every training session was an uphill battle, every mission a chance for disaster. Kakashi didn't realize the bitterness rising in his throat until the words left his mouth, low and sharp. "I wish I didn't have Naruto on my team," he muttered, the confession slipping out too easily. It hung in the air between them, heavy and unfiltered. He tilted his cup and downed the last of the sake in a single swallow. It burned on the way down, but not nearly enough. Asuma raised a brow at the statement, his smirk returning with a quiet hum of amusement. "Well, that's what you get for taking the dead last," he said casually, as though commenting on the weather. His shrug was loose, indifferent. "All I know about him is what's in the academy records." Kurenai's expression shifted, her smile fading as the weight of Kakashi's words settled between them. Her crimson eyes narrowed, glinting with something firmer than mere disagreement. "I don't think Naruto-san is that bad," she said at last, her voice calm but edged with quiet steel. There was no judgment in her tone, only conviction. The tavern's warmth seemed to dim around her. The noise of the room carried on. Muffled laughter, the rattle of dice from a nearby table, but the conversation at their little corner table had taken a heavier turn. "I was one of his academy instructors once," she continued, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "Just for a short time, back when I was still a chunin. He was loud, yes. Craved attention. But, can you really blame him?" Her gaze lingered on the sake bottle, unfocused, as if staring through it. "People either ignored him or treated him like a stain on their lives. Like he didn't belong." Her words faltered for a moment, and the tension in her shoulders deepened. A memory flickered behind her eyes, one she clearly didn't revisit often. "There was an incident," she said quietly, barely above the hum of conversation around them. "He placed first in his class that term. The older instructors didn't like it. One of them locked him in a classroom, and," her jaw tightened, the words thick with restrained anger. "They let the adults, civilians, come in. Let them beat him. Said it would teach him humility." Asuma froze mid-drag on his cigarette. Kurenai's voice had grown brittle, like thin glass held together by control alone. I stopped it, she said, shaking her head slightly. But it was enough to make me quit the academy. I couldn't stand by and pretend it was okay. After that, I always suspected something was off. Sabotage, maybe. He shouldn't have been the dead last. Not after that. A heavy silence followed her words, thick enough to press down on the table itself. Kakashi stared at his cup, then set it down with a soft thud. The sound was quiet, but final. Sabotaged or not, he said, his voice low and clipped, he's useless now. His eye didn't waver, and neither did the bitterness in his tone. He can't do anything right. He doesn't think before he acts. He doesn't learn. And to be honest, he leaned forward slightly, voice dropping into something colder. I think the third passed him out of pity. If he doesn't start improving soon, I'm filing a formal request. Either he gets pulled from the shinobi roster or reassigned to the reserves. He's not cut out for this. The table went still. Kurenai didn't speak. Asuma's smile had vanished. But Kakashi didn't notice. He was already reaching for the bottle, pouring himself another drink. The sharp scent of sake filled the space between them, but it did little to mask the tension. Or the quiet fracture that had opened in the air. Well, came a voice from behind, low and deceptively cheerful, that's quite an assessment, Kakashi. The words cut through the air like a blade, crisp and deliberate. Kakashi's hand froze mid-pour. A thin stream of sake overflowed the rim of his cup, trailing across the wood like a nervous sweat. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. That voice, rich, unbothered on the surface, but sharp underneath, could only belong to one man. Jiraiya of the Sannin. Slowly, Kakashi shifted in his seat, lifting his eye to the tall figure now standing in the doorway. The soft glow of the tavern's lanterns caught on the man's mane of wild, white hair, casting shadows that danced across the lines of his face. His usual wide grin was in place, but those who truly knew Jiraiya could see the difference. The smile didn't reach his eyes. Not even close. There was a quiet storm behind that gaze, an undercurrent of restrained fury, simmering beneath a carefully constructed mask of levity. Jiraiya's stance was loose, easy, but Kakashi could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a fire. I was going to wait a little longer before stepping in, Jiraiya said, his tone calm, almost too calm. But it seems like you've already decided Naruto isn't worth your time. The room had gone completely still. Even the background noise, the idle chatter, the clinking of glasses, seemed to fade under the weight of the moment. So I'll be taking my godson now. The words struck like a slap. Wait. Jiraiya-sama. Kakashi started, rising halfway out of his seat, the sudden crack in his composure evident in his voice. But the words came out too fast, too unsteady. His thoughts were already scrambling to form some kind of explanation, something to pull back the moment. But it was too late. Jiraiya disappeared in an instant. One flicker of movement, and he was gone, like a gust of wind through an open window. Only the soft sway of the tavern door, left ajar in his wake, proved he'd been there at all. Silence descended again, heavier now. Kurenai stood slowly, her chair scraping softly against the floor. Her face gave nothing away. Calm, unreadable, but her voice carried a chill. Well, Kakashi, she said, gathering her things with quiet finality, looks like you got your wish. She didn't look back as she walked out, her dark silhouette vanishing into the shadows of the street. Asuma stayed seated, slowly leaning back in his chair. He let out a low whistle and took a long drag from his cigarette, exhaling a cloud of smoke that curled up toward the rafters. Well, he said, turning his head to glance at Kakashi with a crooked smirk, looks like you're screwed. And I wouldn't want to be you when Jiraiya gives the Hokage a full report. Kakashi didn't respond. He stared down at the now empty cup in his hand, the weight of it unfamiliar, heavy. The sharp scent of sake lingered in the air, but it no longer warmed him. What have I done? The next day, morning broke over Konoha with a hush rather than a flourish. Soft light filtered through the clouds, casting the village in a muted gray. The streets were quiet, damp from an early drizzle that still clung to rooftops and leaves in gentle droplets. Naruto woke earlier than usual. Something felt off. It wasn't the light or the weather. He was used to sleeping through storms and sunlight alike. No, this was something else. A feeling in his gut, uneasy and heavy. He stretched slowly, his limbs still sluggish with sleep, and made his way to the small kitchenette of his apartment, scratching at his unruly hair. The scent of rice just beginning to cook filled the air when a soft, unexpected knock echoed at the door. Naruto blinked. He wasn't used to polite knocks. Most people didn't even bother. They banged or shouted or just ignored him entirely. Cautious, he moved to the door and cracked it open. His eyes widened. An Anbu, a tall woman, stood before him, long violet hair spilling over her shoulders in sleek waves. Her mask, white with cat-like features, obscured her face, but not the aura of calm she carried. Most Anbu, when forced to interact with him, treated him like something unpleasant to step around. This one didn't. Her posture was relaxed, her gaze steady. Naruto-san, she said softly, her voice level but not cold. The Hokage is waiting for you at the mansion. His heart skipped a beat. The old man, he asked before he could stop himself. What does he want this early? Did I mess something up again? The thought hit fast and hard. Had he broken a rule? Failed too badly on yesterday's mission? Was this about Kakashi? He shook the feeling off with a rough exhale, grabbing his jacket from the hook by the door. The Anbu didn't push or prod. She simply turned and began walking, and Naruto followed, glancing around as they made their way through the waking streets of the village. What surprised him more than her presence was where she led him. Straight inside the Hokage mansion. No waiting outside, no suspicious stares from the guards. No awkward silence while someone checked if the Hokage was available. Just a smooth, uninterrupted walk through the front doors and down the quiet halls. It was such a small thing. But to Naruto, it felt different. Like respect, or at least, like he wasn't being treated like an afterthought. He smiled up at her, the smallest flicker of warmth rising in his chest. Thanks, Cat-chan. The Anbu tilted her head at the nickname, her mask giving nothing away, but she offered a slight nod in return. He's waiting for you inside. Naruto hesitated for only a second before pushing the door open. The Hokage's office was as he remembered, bathed in soft morning light spilling through the wide windows, casting long beams across shelves lined with old tomes, scrolls, and relics of past ages. The faint scent of ink and burning tobacco lingered in the air, a quiet constant that came with the presence of the third. Hiruzen Sarutobi sat behind his desk, as always, buried in mountains of paperwork. His robes were crisp, his expression measured, but his tired eyes lifted with quiet warmth the moment Naruto entered. What Naruto wasn't expecting was the man standing beside him. Tall, broad-shouldered, unmistakable. The stranger's spiky white hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and his red haori hung open over a mesh shirt and heavy slacks. A massive scroll was strapped to his back, nearly the size of Naruto himself. His whole presence felt larger than life, like he'd just walked off the set of some old samurai flick. Naruto blinked, then squinted suspiciously. "Sup, old man," he said, crossing his arms and nodding at the Hokage. "Why'd you call me here? And who's the weird guy with the white hair?" The moment the words left his mouth, the tall man recoiled as if struck. "Weird, weird," he shouted, stumbling back with the dramatics of a stage actor before collapsing face first to the floor in exaggerated despair. This generation has no respect. Naruto tilted his head. That was fast, he thought. This guy's a weirdo for sure. The Hokage chuckled, his shoulders shaking ever so slightly with amusement as he folded his hands over his desk. Naruto-kun, how did you know Jiraiya is how should I say, unique individual? Naruto smirked and tapped a finger against his temple with mock pride. I saw him years ago, he announced. I was sneaking around the hot springs, trying to get inspiration for a new jutsu, and there he was. Talking to himself about how Konoha has the most gifted women. He even raised his hands to make air quotes, his unimpressed tone making it clear that whatever admiration Jiraiya might have hoped for, he wasn't getting it here. Jiraiya lifted his head with an anguished look of betrayal. Not even the kids respect me anymore, he wailed, clutching his chest like he'd been mortally wounded. The third Hokage sighed, muttering something under his breath about the moral decline of legendary shinobi. His fingers ghosted over one of the nearby scrolls, a weary expression flickering across his face. I still can't believe this brat invented that absurd sexy jutsu, and even worse, he thought grimly, I fell for it once. That's definitely going into the scroll of sealing. Wait, sexy jutsu. Jiraiya's head snapped up like a hound catching the scent of prey. The glint in his eyes sharpened with sudden, unfiltered interest. What's this about a sexy jutsu? He asked, voice brimming with anticipation as a single drop of blood trickled from one nostril. His imagination clearly wasted no time painting vivid pictures in his mind, each one more ridiculous than the last. Naruto blinked, already regretting bringing it up. The third Hokage coughed pointedly, his tone laced with warning. Enough. His steely gaze cut across the room toward Jiraiya, who was still caught somewhere between perversion and fascination. Even from outside the office, the subtle presence of the Anbu seemed to sharpen, as if they too were glaring through the door. Hiruzen sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Jiraiya, didn't you have something important to tell Naruto? He asked, his voice now heavy with impatience. Let's stay on topic. Jiraiya flinched at the reprimand but quickly straightened his posture. He wiped his nose on the back of his wrist and adopted a more composed expression. The shift was subtle but real, playfulness giving way to gravity, though the remnants of his usual grin lingered. Right, he said, his voice lower now. Naruto, there's something you need to know. His gaze locked with the boy's, unblinking, direct. I'm Jiraiya, he began, one of the three legendary Sannin, and I'm also your godfather. Silence settled over the room like a heavy fog. Naruto stared at him, blinking slowly, his brow beginning to furrow. You're my what? I'm your godfather, Jiraiya repeated, firmer this time. The words hung in the air, heavier than the boy had expected. They didn't settle, they hit, and then, Naruto moved. Without warning, he lunged forward, hurling himself across the office with enough force to shake the furniture. His small frame crashed into Jiraiya's chest with a thud, fists clenching tightly in the red fabric of the man's howry. Where the hell have you been? His voice cracked. Part rage, part grief, but there was no mistaking the ache that bled through the sound. Jiraiya didn't stumble. Despite the impact, he remained still, arms loose at his sides, letting the boy strike and shout without resistance. Naruto's voice dropped to a whisper, hoarse and sharp. Where have you been? Each word landed with precision, like kunai driven into soft earth. Jiraiya's expression shifted again. The smile vanished. The mask slipped. His eyes, once so full of mirth and mischief, now looked older. Tired, regretful. Because I was busy, Naruto, he said softly. Busy keeping the village safe. After the Nine Tails attacked, Konoha was exposed. Weak. If I hadn't been out there spreading misinformation, making sure the world didn't know just how vulnerable we were. This village wouldn't have lasted. He let the silence stretch. I did it for everyone's sake. Naruto's grip loosened, but he didn't move away. He stayed close, his hands still clenched in Jiraiya's robes, as if afraid the man would vanish again if he let go. His eyes never left Jiraiya's face. He was still waiting. Jiraiya hesitated. The words sat heavy on his tongue, reluctant to surface. But that's not the only reason, he murmured, his voice trailing into the stillness of the Hokage's office. He looked at Naruto, really looked this time. The boy stood there, radiating raw energy and guarded hurt, his fists clenched at his sides, brows drawn low. That spiky blonde hair was unmistakable. So were the eyes, sharp, vivid blue, piercing in a way that stole breath. Minato's eyes. But the fire behind them. That spark, that barely contained storm of emotion, that was Kushina. Through and through. Her fire, her tenacity, her unwillingness to back down even when the world seemed stacked against her. It hurt, seeing them both so clearly in Naruto's face, in the way he stood, demanded answers. It made Jiraiya ache in places he'd buried for years. What other reason? Naruto asked, his tone sharper now. He'd stepped back, just slightly, but his gaze didn't waver. There was no fear in it, just expectation. And hurt. Jiraiya exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. Because I'm not the parenting type, Naruto. The words were honest, unvarnished. If I'd taken you with me after the 9 Tails, your life would have been even harder. I'm always on the road. In and out of danger. Always one misstep from being hunted. That's not a life for a kid. His voice dropped slightly, rough at the edges. You deserved better than that. Naruto's expression twisted. Disbelief flashing first, then anger, then something far more fragile. His voice cracked when he spoke again, low and bitter. So you left me in a village where people hate me instead. The question landed like a kunai. Jiraiya flinched but didn't look away. He met Naruto's gaze head-on, unwilling to dodge the weight of that truth. I won't make excuses, he said quietly. I made the best decision I could at the time, but I know it wasn't enough. Then, slowly, he crouched, bringing himself to Naruto's level, not as a legendary shinobi, not as a Sannin, but as something simpler. Something real. I'm here now, Naruto. I know I can't undo the past. But I want to make things right. I want to train you. Not just as a shinobi. His voice softened, sincere. As your godfather. Naruto's eyes shimmered. Not with tears, but with something harder to name. Conflict churned beneath the surface as he stared at the man in front of him. For a moment, Jiraiya braced himself. Ready for a punch, or a shout, or even for Naruto to turn and walk away. But instead, the boy muttered under his breath, his jaw set. Fine, but if you're training me, you'd better not hold back. I don't want any of that soft godfather stuff. Jiraiya blinked, then barked out a laugh, loud and unfiltered, echoing through the room like a burst of sunlight through clouds. Deal, brat. Deal. The third Hokage watched the exchange with a faint, wistful smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The boy's defiant resolve, Jiraiya's softening heart, it stirred something in him that had long been dulled by years of bureaucracy and regret. For the first time in longer than he cared to admit, Hiruzen Sarutobi felt something rare. Hope. Maybe, he thought, Naruto finally has the support he's always needed. That fragile sense of peace was short-lived. Wait, Naruto blurted out, his voice cutting through the quiet that had settled. What about Team 7? What's gonna happen to them if I leave? The question hung in the air like a suspended breath. There was uncertainty in it, hesitation, but also something else. Attachment. Despite the tension, despite the stinging comments from Kakashi, Despite the way Sasuke looked down on him or how Sakura barely acknowledged him outside of eye rolls, Naruto couldn't imagine not being part of that team. They were his first squad. His first place. The third Hokage exhaled slowly, folding his hands atop the polished surface of his desk. His aged face looked even older under the soft morning light, the creases around his mouth and eyes more pronounced than ever. "Naruto," he began, his voice steady but heavy. "Jiraiya overheard a conversation yesterday, between Kakashi and the other Jonin-sensei." Naruto's brows pinched together. "Huh, what do you mean by that?" The words hit something low in his chest, a tension that had always been there but now pulled tight, like a wire ready to snap. He wanted to be surprised. He really did. But he wasn't. Not completely. Kakashi never really looked at him the way he did Sasuke. During training, his size came quicker, his patience thinner. And when Naruto failed, missed a throw, botched a technique, he could feel it. That quiet disappointment. That look that said, "Why are you even here?" "It's not my fault," Naruto thought bitterly, his chest tightening. "How am I supposed to get better when everything's already stacked against me?" The memories rose like a tide, uninvited and unforgiving. Just getting basic ninja tools had been a nightmare. His kunai and shuriken were junk. Dull-edged, off-balance, the cheapest stuff on the market. He remembered standing in the weapons shop, counting out crumpled Ryo bills with shaking hands. That one set had cost him nearly 5 months' worth of rent. After that, it had been nothing but 1 cup of instant ramen a day, for an entire month. His fists clenched at his sides, jaw tight. "No one knows what I had to trade just to show up with the same gear as everyone else." And taijutsu. That was an even crueler joke. Every time he tried to mirror the standard academy forms, his body refused to cooperate. The stances felt off, forced, like trying to wear armor that didn't belong to him. He remembered the laughter, the taunts from the other students. What kind of fighting style is that? They said it with smirks, with sneers. No one ever told him what he was doing wrong. Eventually, he stopped asking. So he'd figured it out on his own. He moved the way he had to, rough, improvised, unrefined. A scrappy, brawler's rhythm born from instinct and desperation. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't pretty, but it worked. "Naruto." Jiraiya's voice cut through the storm of thoughts swirling in the boy's head. His tone was firm, blunt, with no room left for sugarcoating. "Kakashi said he doesn't think you're worth being on his team, or even good enough to be a shinobi." The words landed like a kunai to the chest. Naruto froze. His breath caught in his throat as if someone had knocked the air from his lungs. His wide, disbelieving eyes locked onto Jiraiya's, searching for anything, that said it was a mistake. A cruel joke, a lie. But Jiraiya didn't flinch, didn't soften. He stood solid, unwavering, because Naruto deserved the truth, even if it hurt. What?" Naruto whispered, the sound brittle, stripped of its usual boisterous energy. His voice cracked as it slipped past his lips, barely louder than a breath. Jiraiya continued, his expression resolute. "He doesn't see your value, Naruto. But that's his mistake. I do. That's why, from this moment forward, you're my student. Team 7 will continue without you. Kakashi can focus on Sasuke and Sakura." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "You, on the other hand," he said, his voice quieter now but no less intense, "are coming with me." Naruto's head dropped. His shoulders sagged beneath the invisible weight pressing down on them. For a moment, he said nothing. The quiet was thick, filled only with the faint rustle of papers and the distant creak of the office windows shifting with the breeze. "I knew Kakashi-sensei didn't like me, but not worth being a shinobi." The thought twisted inside him, cold and sharp. All his life, he'd clawed for recognition, pushed himself to the brink just to be seen. to matter. And now, even his own teacher, the one who was supposed to guide him, didn't believe in him. But then, something in Jiraiya's words broke through the haze. He sees my value. He wants to train me. That single flicker of belief, real belief, sparked something within him. Naruto slowly lifted his head, and though his throat still burned, there was a fire growing in his eyes. Bright, defiant. Okay, he said, his voice clearer now, more solid. I'll do it. I'll be your student, Ero Sennin. Jiraiya's brows twitched. Ero Sennin, he repeated, his moment of gravity promptly shattered. Show some respect, brat. It's Jiraiya-sensei. A faint smirk curled at the edge of Naruto's lips. You're not fooling anyone. You're still a pervert. Jiraiya sputtered, clearly caught between indignation and exasperated amusement. From behind his desk, the third Hokage cleared his throat, his calm voice cutting through the exchange like a bell. Jiraiya, he said, drawing both their gazes, if you're taking Naruto out of the village, what's your plan? The moment shifted again, sobering. Jiraiya straightened, the teasing edge vanishing from his face. His tone was all business now. We'll be gone for a few months, minimum. I need to check in with one of my informants. And, he paused, casting a glance toward the Hokage. Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. And I need to consult with Tsunade about Naruto's health. Naruto's brows drew together, confusion etched across his face. What does my health have to do with this? The room had shifted again. This time into something more serious, something Naruto wasn't sure how to feel about. The pace of the conversation was moving faster than he could keep up with, and it left him feeling like he was 2 steps behind. His eyes darted between Jiraiya and the Hokage. Wait. We're leaving the village. Like, leaving. For months. Jiraiya turned to face him fully, his expression calm but unwavering. Yes, Naruto, he said. You've never been beyond the walls of Konoha, have you? Naruto shook his head slowly. No, but, what about Iruka-sensei? And Ayame? And Chuki? His voice dipped, unsure. I don't know if I want to leave them behind for that long. Even now, after everything, those were the few people who'd always been kind to him. Who made this place feel like home, even when the rest of the village didn't. Jiraiya's gaze softened at that, the faintest crease of empathy lining his face. I get it, kid, he said gently. It's tough, leaving people who actually care. But this is important. I need to take you to Tsunade. His tone darkened, serious now. The warmth in his eyes didn't fade, but it took on a weight Naruto hadn't heard before. Especially after what I've read in those hospital reports. A cold, uneasy chill crept into Naruto's stomach. He knew, of course he knew, the hospital staff didn't like him. Most of them avoided eye contact. Some outright refused to treat him unless Iruka was there to press the issue. But hearing Jiraiya speak about it so plainly made that quiet truth feel bigger. Heavier. Naruto's voice wavered. What reports? It was the Hokage who answered, his tone composed but grave. Naruto, there have been incidents in the past. Times where certain medical staff failed to treat your injuries correctly. He paused. In fact, he continued, voice lowering slightly, there were occasions where it appears they may have tried to harm you. Naruto's heart stuttered. Tried to what? He asked sharply, his voice rising with disbelief. The words hit like shrapnel. Hot, sharp, unreal. Jiraiya's jaw tensed, his eyes narrowing. Exactly, he said flatly. That's why I'm taking you to Tsunade. I want to make sure there's no permanent damage. And I want to make damn sure no one ever gets the chance to hurt you like that again. The fire behind his words left no room for argument. It wasn't just concern, it was a promise. A threat to anyone who dared cross that line again. Naruto swallowed hard, his throat dry. He looked down, His hands curled into fists at his sides. Anger, confusion, betrayal, all of it swirled inside him, heavy and restless. All this time, and no one told me. It was like a curtain being yanked back, revealing just how deep the shadows had gone. The truth had been buried beneath years of silence. Now it stood in the open, raw and ugly. He didn't like any of this. But he could see it in their faces, Jiraiya's, the Hokage's. This wasn't a joke. It wasn't pity. It was real. Naruto looked up again. His voice was quieter now, but steady. "All right," he said, nodding. "Let's do it." Jiraiya's grin returned, wide and proud. He clapped a firm hand on Naruto's shoulder. "That's the spirit, kid. You and I are gonna show this village what you're really capable of." The third Hokage nodded, though the lines etched deep into his face spoke of burdens words couldn't express. His eyes followed Naruto as the boy disappeared down the hallway, the echo of his footsteps fading behind the swinging door. "Danzo and the elders will have my head for this," Hiruzen thought grimly, his fingers curling slightly atop the desk. "But this is what's best. For Naruto, for his future, and for Konoha. Meet me at the front gate in an hour, kid," Jiraiya said, tossing a small cloth pouch through the air. Naruto caught it with both hands, surprised by the unexpected weight. He blinked down at it, giving it a quick shake. The sound of coins clinking together immediately lit up his expression. "What's this?" he asked, curiosity already turning into excitement. "It's some cash," Jiraiya replied with a wave of his hand. "Enough for food and whatever else you need. Pack your things. Enough for a few months. And grab some ramen before we leave. Think of it as a farewell bowl." A grin broke across Naruto's face, wide and boyish. "Got it, Ero Sennin," he said with mock precision, giving a playful salute before dashing out the door in a blur of orange and enthusiasm. The door creaked back and forth for a moment before settling shut behind him. The office was quieter now. Hiruzen leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His hands came to rest on the armrests, heavy with more than just age. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was loaded with everything that hadn't been said aloud. He turned to Jiraiya, his voice low. "I'll speak to Kakashi later," he said. "You just make sure Naruto stays safe." Jiraiya offered a crooked smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Don't worry," he said. "I plan to stick close to him. I've got some old informants to check in with, and Tsunade's going to need time to look Naruto over properly." His fingers scratched the back of his head, sheepish. "She's going to kill me for not telling her about Naruto sooner. Honestly, she might beat the crap out of me for it." Hiruzen gave a soft chuckle, though it was tinged with fatigue. "She won't stop with you. If she sees the hospital records, I wouldn't blame her for snapping my neck first." Jiraiya's smile faded, his face growing grim. "Yeah, those records," he murmured. His jaw tightened. "I almost lost it reading them. The fact that nurses and doctors could look at a child and treat him like that, like he was disposable." His fists clenched at his sides. "They're lucky I didn't gut them." Hiruzen nodded slowly, each word heavy with guilt. "I should have stepped in sooner," he said quietly. "I let the council run too much. I let their fear and politics blind me. I won't forgive myself for that." The words hung in the air like the lingering scent of smoke after a fire. Jiraiya tried to break the weight with a dry smile. "Well, at least we'll get matching hospital beds when she's done pounding the hell out of us." That earned a real laugh from the Hokage, tired, weathered, but genuine. The kind that only came from two old friends who had survived too much together. They sat for a long moment in the stillness, a shared silence that spoke of regret, of understanding, and the faintest hope that maybe, just maybe, they were starting to put things right. Meanwhile, with Naruto sprinted through the village streets, the wind tugging at his jacket and the morning sun casting long shadows behind him. The rooftops of Konoha blurred past, familiar buildings standing like quiet sentinels as he raced toward his apartment. His door creaked open under the force of his entrance, and Naruto didn't slow down. He moved with practiced speed, pulling an old, faded book bag from the corner. The zipper stuck for a second, but he yanked it open and began stuffing it with the essentials: 2 changes of clothes, a patched-up jacket, and a well-worn scarf folded with surprising care. He tossed in Gama-chan, his trusted frog-shaped coin purse, giving it a brief squeeze before dropping it between the clothes. Then came his weapons pouch. He took a quick inventory. A few kunai, dulled at the edges from repeated sharpening, and several shuriken, some chipped, all old. Not much, but it was what he had. Naruto paused for a moment, standing in the middle of his room. The place was small, cramped. The wallpaper peeled at the edges, and the ceiling groaned when the wind picked up. But still, it was his. His stomach growled loudly, snapping him from the quiet. "Ramen first," he muttered, grabbing the bag and slinging it over his shoulder. Ero Sennin's orders. The streets were beginning to come alive as he made his way toward Ichiraku Ramen. Merchants opening shopfronts, mothers calling after their kids, shinobi moving with urgency toward their assignments. But Naruto walked with something different in his step. Not urgency, not even excitement, purpose. The familiar wooden sign of Ichiraku came into view, and as always, the moment he stepped beneath the awning, he was met with the comforting aroma of broth, spices, and warm noodles. The scent wrapped around him like a welcome home hug. His face lit up. "Hey, Ayame Nichan, old man Chuki," he called, slipping onto his usual stool at the counter. Ayame glanced up from behind the counter, her smile immediate and bright. "Good to see you, Naruto-kun." Her eyes flicked to the bag resting at his side, and a curious expression crossed her face. "Heading somewhere?" "Yup," Naruto grinned, leaning forward with pride swelling in his voice. "I'm leaving the village for a few months to train with my new sensei." Ayame tilted her head, her brow lifting just slightly. "New sensei? What about Team 7? Naruto's grin widened, pride swelling in his chest. The words were already forming on his tongue, ready to spill out in a triumphant announcement, until a voice cut through the air like a blade, cool and familiar, laced with that ever-present condescension. "What's this nonsense about a new sensei, Dobi?" The air seemed to shift. Naruto groaned aloud, the warmth in his chest immediately evaporating. Of course he had to show up now. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The tone, the timing, it was signature Uchiha. "What do you want, Sasuke Tem?" he muttered, his back still to the door. Sasuke strolled into the shop with the same effortless arrogance he always carried, his hands buried in his pockets, shoulders loose, eyes already narrowed with suspicion. "I came to drag you to the team meeting you forgot about," he said casually, though his smirk hinted he knew Naruto hadn't forgotten anything. "But now you're here, running your mouth with some ridiculous story. Kakashi-sensei didn't say anything about you getting a new sensei, let alone leaving the village." Naruto spun on the stool, the legs of his chair scraping the floor. His expression darkened, glare sharp beneath furrowed brows. "That's because I'm not on Team 7 anymore, idiot," he snapped. "I have a new sensei. And he's taking me out of the village to train." Sasuke's easy smirk faltered. Not much, but enough. It flickered for the briefest moment before returning, tighter this time. Less amused. "What?" he said, flatly. "You're lying. No one would waste their time teaching the dead last." Naruto's fists clenched on his knees, knuckles whitening. There it is again. That old, familiar sting in Sasuke's voice. The way he always said dead last like it was Naruto's name. Like it defined him. "Well, it just so happens," Naruto growled, rising to his feet now, his voice loud and clear, that my new sensei isn't just anyone. He's Jiraiya, one of the legendary Sannin. Ayame gasped, her eyes wide with surprise. From the back, Chuki glanced over with a knowing smile, saying nothing, but his eyes crinkled in quiet approval. Meanwhile, Sasuke stood motionless, the name hanging between them like a drawn blade. His smirk shifted, less of a grin now, more of a twitch at the corner of his lips. Something colder, sharper. There's no way. Sasuke snapped, the calm in his voice fracturing as something sharper flared behind his eyes. His smirk had vanished completely now, replaced with a dark scowl and a flash of unmistakable jealousy. Why would one of the Sannin choose you? What could you possibly offer him? His voice dripped with disbelief, but beneath that, just beneath, was a question he couldn't voice. Why not me? Naruto didn't turn around. He didn't need to. Instead, he waved a hand over his shoulder with casual defiance and leaned back against the counter, completely at ease. Think whatever you want, Tem, he said with a grin. Next time you see me, I'll be stronger than you. Just you wait. The words weren't loud, but they carried. Sasuke's fists clenched at his sides, tight enough that his knuckles cracked. Stronger than me. The thought struck deep, irritating and impossible to ignore. He'd trained harder than anyone, studied relentlessly, mastered techniques with precision. And yet Naruto, the fool, the dropout, the dead last, was getting personal training from a Sannin. It made no sense. Why is this idiot getting the kind of training I need? Sasuke's glare burned into Naruto's back, his mind already churning with plans. How to confront Kakashi, how to demand an explanation, a fix, anything. But before he could speak again, the soft thunk of a knife hitting wood snapped through the tension. Chuki had stepped out from the kitchen, a large chef's knife in one hand and a half-peeled carrot in the other. His face was calm, but his eyes held a warning. No fighting in my shop, boys, he said evenly. The silence that followed was brief but biting. Sasuke's jaw tightened. He met the older man's gaze for a moment, then scoffed under his breath. Whatever, he muttered, turning on his heel. There's no way you'll ever surpass me, loser. He stalked out of the shop, the door swinging shut behind him with a sharp clang, already replaying the conversation in his head, already preparing for his next move. Naruto didn't even look up. He just smiled as Ayame placed a steaming bowl of ramen in front of him. Thanks, Ayame Nichan, he said brightly, the irritation from a moment ago dissolving the instant the scent of miso and noodles hit him. You're welcome, Naruto-kun, she replied, though her voice was a touch softer than before. Her smile lingered, warm but touched with worry as she watched him dive into his food. I hope this new teacher can help him, she thought. He's already been through so much. Training Ground 7. The late morning sun filtered through the canopy above, its golden light streaming in broken patterns across the clearing. The air was warm, the soft rustle of leaves carried on a gentle breeze that stirred the grass and fluttered the edges of the red training posts. Birds chirped somewhere in the distance, their melodies faint beneath the mounting tension in the air. Sakura Haruno stood near the edge of the clearing, arms folded tightly over her chest, one foot tapping out a rhythm of pure frustration against the dusty ground. Her gaze swept over the training field, though it wasn't focused on anything, or anyone. Her glare was simply there, aimed at the world. Where the hell is Naruto Baka? She snapped, her voice slicing through the stillness like a thrown kunai. Her shrill complaint echoed for a moment before being swallowed by the forest around them. A few startled birds took flight from the trees. The irritation on her face was palpable, her brows knitted, lips pursed in a tight frown. She shifted slightly, making sure she remained in the shade of a nearby tree. The sunlight glinted off her pink hair, casting a soft glow around her. But any trace of serenity was undone by the scowl on her face. Sweat clung to the back of her neck, and she brushed at it with a grimace. I am not going to look like some sweaty pig in front of Sasuke-kun. Her indignation burned hotter than the sun overhead. High above, perched like a shadow in the crook of a tall tree, Kakashi Hatake sat with one knee bent, the other leg dangling lazily over the branch. A familiar orange book rested in his gloved hands. Ika Ika Paradise, worn and well-loved, but his eye wasn't scanning the pages. Not really. He turned another page with robotic ease, though his gaze remained distant, unfocused. Despite knowing the book nearly word for word, he hadn't absorbed a single sentence since he cracked it open. Sakura's complaining didn't help, but it wasn't what unsettled him. It was something else, something heavier. The rusty kunai. The thought crept in uninvited, dragging with it the sour taste of regret. His words from the night before echoed in the back of his mind. Sharp, careless things born from irritation and sake. Words he hadn't meant to hit so hard. And yet, they had. He doesn't belong on my team. He's not cut out to be a shinobi. The memory made his stomach twist. Sure, he'd been frustrated. Exhausted, even. But that didn't excuse how cruel it sounded when said aloud, how final. The bitterness in his voice hadn't just exposed his doubt. It had revealed a fracture in his role as a sensei. A fracture that, maybe, couldn't be undone. He exhaled through his nose, the wind stirring the pages in his book. Regret wasn't something he wore openly. But today, it clung to him like a second shadow. Kakashi sighed, the breath slipping out slowly as he turned another page of his book. The words blurred together, lines of text melting into shapes he didn't bother to decipher. His mind wasn't on reading. Still no sign of Naruto. "Where is that idiot?" shouted Sakura. He'd been gone all morning, and Kakashi had long since grown tired of Sakura's whining. Eventually, he'd sent Sasuke to track the boy down, hoping it might diffuse some of the tension in the clearing, or at least distract Sasuke from snapping at his teammate. Now, he could feel the Uchiha's chakra approaching from beyond the tree line, spiked and restless, laced with anger and something deeper, more volatile. Frustration, maybe, jealousy. Sasuke-kun. Sakura's voice rang out the moment he came into view, high-pitched and giddy with sudden excitement. Her irritation vanished like mist in the morning sun, replaced with syrupy sweetness as she ran up to him, practically bouncing on her heels. She clasped her hands in front of her chest, her green eyes wide and shining. As if just seeing him was a blessing from the heavens. Kakashi landed lightly on the ground before them, dropping from the tree without so much as a stir of dust. His usual calm expression remained intact, though his eye sharpened as he took in Sasuke's posture, the tension coiled in his shoulders, the fire behind his narrowed gaze. "Where's Naruto?" Kakashi asked, his tone deceptively casual. Sasuke didn't answer right away. He stopped a few paces from them, his fists clenched at his sides, jaw taut. Then, his voice, low and laced with fury. "Why the hell is he apprenticed to Jiraiya of the Sannin?" The words exploded from him like a detonated tag, echoing through the quiet forest. "What?" Sakura shrieked, her jaw falling open. She turned to Kakashi, eyes wide with disbelief. "You mean that Jiraiya?" Kakashi said nothing, but inwardly, the news hit with a weight he hadn't expected. Jiraiya took Naruto. That wasn't part of the plan. The Hokage had mentioned a reassignment. He'd assumed it would be a temporary transfer, maybe another Jonin stepping in, nothing more. But handing Naruto off to one of the most legendary shinobi in Konoha's history. Hiruzen didn't waste any time, Kakashi thought grimly. "Kakashi!" Sasuke barked, stepping forward. His voice rose, cracking slightly under the weight of his emotion. "This is wrong. I'm the one who needs to train under Jiraiya. I'm the one who has to get stronger, not that loser." His breath came faster now, fists trembling at his sides, knuckles white. "That's right," Sakura chimed in quickly, her voice shrill and breathless. She stepped closer to Sasuke, nodding with fervor. Sasuke-kun deserves to be the student of Jiraiya-sama. Her eyes sparkled, not with curiosity, but something far more manic, more hopeful. This is it, she thought, her mind already spiraling. With Naruto gone, Team 7 can finally be what it was meant to be. Just Sasuke-kun and me. I'll be the only one by his side. It's destiny. Kakashi's visible eye narrowed as it shifted toward Sasuke, studying him with quiet intensity. Who told you this? Sasuke didn't hesitate. The loser himself, he snapped, his voice clipped and sharp. He was at that ramen shop he always hangs out in, bragging about it like he's some kind of big shot. Said he's leaving the village to train. Outside the village, his lip curled slightly, as if the words tasted bitter coming out. Kakashi didn't miss the edge in his voice, the way it cracked beneath the surface. It wasn't just anger, not entirely. There was something deeper, a flicker of panic, jealousy, fear. Sasuke, the pride of the Uchiha clan, the boy burdened with impossible expectations, was unraveling at the thought of Naruto, a boy he'd written off as weak, being chosen for something greater. Someone else might surpass him. And that terrified him. I'll be right back, Kakashi said, his tone low but firm, leaving no room for questions. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. Whatever was going on, he needed to hear it from Naruto himself. Sasuke, Sakura, he added, glancing between them. 15 laps around the training ground. Then spar until I return. Before either of them could protest or respond, he vanished with a flicker of movement, silent, fast, and final. Sasuke stood frozen for a moment, fists clenched so tightly his nails dug into his palms. His jaw tightened. Why Naruto? His mind refused to accept it, cycling through the same thought again and again like a mantra. Why him? The idea of Naruto being trained by a Sannin, Jiraiya, no less, felt like an insult. Like a mockery of everything Sasuke had worked for. Everything he had sacrificed. If anyone deserves that kind of power, it's me. I'm the one who has to kill my brother. I'm the one who has to be the strongest. Nearby, Sakura was paying little attention to Sasuke's seething fury. Her mind had already floated somewhere else entirely, swept up in a rose-tinted daydream. With Naruto gone, she thought, a dreamy smile beginning to tug at her lips, I can finally focus all my energy on Sasuke-kun. Just the two of us. She imagined them training side by side, locked in some poetic, moonlit sparring match. Their eyes would meet. He would finally see her. Really see her. He'll realize I've always been there for him. He'll confess his love. He'll propose. And we'll have the most beautiful wedding in all of Konoha. Her cheeks flushed pink as her fantasies grew more elaborate. 10 children, she mused with giddy delight. 5 boys, 5 girls. All with perfect Uchiha blood, half pink hair, half black hair. Everyone will say they're the most beautiful children in the village. And Sasuke will call me the best mom ever. Sakura. Sasuke's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. She blinked rapidly, startled. Huh, oh, yes, Sasuke-kun, she said, snapping to attention like a soldier awaiting orders. I'll do whatever you say. Sasuke didn't respond. His gaze was locked on the horizon, eyes narrowed, expression stormy. Kakashi better fix this, he thought, his frustration curdling into something darker. I don't care what it takes. Jiraiya is mine. Naruto slurped down the last of his 15th bowl of ramen, the warm broth sliding down his throat like liquid comfort. He leaned back on his stool with a satisfied sigh, patting his full stomach and grinning up at the ceiling like he'd just accomplished a great feat. Ah, that hit the spot, he said cheerfully, though the brightness in his voice dimmed slightly as he reached for his pouch. He slid the coins Jiraiya had given him across the counter, watching them clink together before Ayame scooped them up with a smile. Take care of yourself out there, Naruto-kun, she said gently, placing a small, neatly wrapped package in front of him. And don't forget to eat something besides instant ramen. Real food, okay. From behind the counter, Chuki chuckled as he wiped down a cutting board. She's right, kid, you're growing. Can't live on cup noodles forever, no matter how good they are. Even the best ramen in the world needs variety. Naruto scratched the back of his head, his sheepish grin returning in full force. Yeah, I got it. Thanks, old man. Thanks, Ayame Nichan. He tucked the package carefully into his bag, adjusting the straps with practiced ease. One last wave, and he was off, ducking beneath the red curtain of Ichiraku and stepping into the late morning sunlight. The streets of Konoha buzzed with activity, but to Naruto, it all felt slightly muted, like he was watching the village through a pane of glass. The warmth from the ramen lingered in his stomach, but the glow of it began to fade as he made his way toward the village gates. That was when the looks began. It started subtly, quick glances, furtive whispers. Then came the not-so-subtle ones. Civilians turned to stare, their expressions cold and openly hostile. Some whispered behind raised hands, others didn't bother hiding their disgust. A woman clutched her child closer as he passed. A vendor narrowed his eyes and spat on the ground. Same old, Naruto thought, bitterness coiling in his chest like smoke. He kept walking, shoulders squared, chin up, but his grip on the strap of his bag tightened until his knuckles widened. It didn't hurt like it used to. Not the same way, but the sting never really went away. It just buried itself deeper, like an old scar that throbbed in the cold. Then, one man, a little bolder than the rest, sneered at him from across the path, muttering something under his breath. Naruto didn't hear it, but he didn't have to. Without stopping, he flicked his forehead protector with a single, casual motion, the metal glinting in the light. I'm a shinobi now, he muttered, just loud enough. Try something. I dare ya. The man paled, flinching slightly before turning away, his voice a low grumble as he retreated into the crowd. As the towering gates of Konoha came into view, standing firm and familiar beneath the mid-morning sun, Naruto's pace quickened. The path beneath his sandals was dappled with shifting shadows from the tall trees overhead, and the scent of dust and pine filled the air. Near the entrance, Jiraiya stood casually, leaning against the guard booth as he chatted with the two shinobi posted there. His booming laugh carried on the breeze, easily recognizable even from a distance. Naruto broke into a light jog, waving as he approached. Sorry, Ero Sennin. Old man Chuki and Ayame Nichan wouldn't let me leave without packing extra food. He grinned, scratching the back of his head with a sheepish chuckle. Like I'd only survive on ramen cups. Jiraiya turned to meet him, a chuckle rumbling in his chest. Good to see you're prepared, brat. Let's. He stopped mid-sentence. In an instant, the amusement vanished from his face. His shoulders squared, eyes sharpening. A faint shift in the air, a familiar chakra, had drawn his focus like a blade at his back. In a blur of swirling leaves, Kakashi Hatake materialized before them, hands tucked casually into his pockets. His arrival was quiet, controlled, but the tension that followed him said more than words. His single eye, sharp beneath his forehead protector, settled on Jiraiya. Jiraiya-sama, he said evenly, though his voice carried a quiet weight. Why didn't you speak to me before pulling Naruto from my squad? Jiraiya didn't flinch. He regarded Kakashi with calm, but the curve of his jaw had tightened. His gaze narrowed, not with surprise, but with challenge. Maybe, he said coolly, because I heard everything I needed to at the Rusty Kunai. Kakashi's brow creased. Jiraiya's tone sharpened like steel drawn across stone. Or did you forget what you said? I wish I never got Naruto on my squad. Or better yet, The Hokage only passed him because he felt bad for him. He's not meant to be a shinobi. He paused. Ring a bell. The words hit the ground like thunder. Naruto's feet came to a halt behind Jiraiya. The warmth in his chest from earlier, the laughter, the food, the excitement, drained away in an instant. He stood frozen, lips parted slightly as if the air had thickened. Slowly, his head turned toward Kakashi, blue eyes wide and disbelieving. The ache in his chest started as a hollow pinch. Then it twisted, sinking deeper. So that's how it is, he muttered, voice low and trembling. You hated me all along. Kakashi blinked, visibly taken aback. Naruto, that's not. No, don't even try. Naruto's voice cracked, his anger igniting beneath the sorrow. It makes sense now. No wonder you always made me do the worst parts of the D-rank missions. You didn't care if I was exhausted. You didn't even look at me most of the time. His fists trembled at his sides. All you ever cared about was Sasuke and Sakura. Kakashi winced. The venom in Naruto's voice was something he wasn't prepared for, sharp, unfiltered, and drenched in pain. He'd seen the boy angry before, loud, defiant, reckless, but never like this. Never so raw. Naruto, he began, but the words fell flat, hollow even to his own ears. But Naruto wasn't finished. And don't think I forgot about our first day as a team. He shouted, stepping forward. His fists clenched tighter, his voice cracking with every word. You tied me up with ninja wire, so tight I couldn't move. I couldn't even use the replacement jutsu. And then you just left me there. The memory surged up, bitter and vivid, playing out in Naruto's mind like it had happened yesterday. If it wasn't for that purple-haired lady, Anko, I think, you would have left me out there all night. He spat. Jiraiya's gaze flicked sharply toward Kakashi, his jaw tightening. His expression darkened, eyes narrowing. Anko, he thought grimly. I'll have to thank her for that. Without a word, he stepped forward and placed a steady hand on Naruto's shoulder, not to silence him, but to ground him. The boy was shaking now, with fury, with grief, with years of unspoken hurt finally spilling free. Kakashi, Jiraiya said, voice low but resolute, you've made it pretty damn clear that you don't see Naruto's potential. That's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. His tone shifted, losing all pretense of patience. But don't you dare act like you were doing him some kind of favor by keeping him on your team. Kakashi stood stiffly, his breath caught in his throat. The weight of Jiraiya's words hit harder than he expected, because deep down, some of it was true. I didn't. He tried again, weakly. You failed him. Jiraiya cut in, sharper this time, like a blade honed on fury. You failed Minato. Kakashi flinched, the name striking deeper than anything else could have. He asked you to watch over Naruto. He trusted you, and this is how you honored that. There was no room for defense. No excuse that wouldn't sound pitiful in comparison to the truth hanging between them. Jiraiya's hand tightened briefly on Naruto's shoulder, steady, protective. Don't worry, he said coldly. I'll do what you clearly couldn't. I'll make sure Naruto becomes the shinobi Minato would have been proud of. His voice lowered, each word heavy with quiet condemnation. You focus on Sasuke. That's all you've cared about anyway, right? Naruto's brow furrowed, the storm in his eyes dimming with confusion. He looked up at Jiraiya, the name lingering in the air like smoke after a fire. Minato, he asked quietly, who's that? For a moment, something shifted in Jiraiya's face, his anger giving way to a softness rarely seen, an old sorrow tucked behind the lines of his grin. He placed a gentle hand on Naruto's back and began to guide him toward the gates. Not now, kid, he said, voice low and steady. We'll talk on the road. He paused once more at the threshold, glancing over his shoulder. His gaze locked onto Kakashi with a finality that spoke louder than any shouted condemnation. It was not cruel. It was not angry. It was simply done. Goodbye, Kakashi. And just like that, he turned and walked away. Naruto followed without hesitation. He didn't look back, except for one last glare cast over his shoulder. The kind that wasn't fueled by childish resentment, but by something deeper. Something that said, "You don't get to hurt me again." Then he turned his back on Kakashi, and didn't look again. Kakashi stood frozen, the dust of their departure swirling around his feet. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows behind the trees, but he felt no warmth. Just the echo of Jiraiya's words, ringing louder than any battle cry. "You failed, Minato." The words coiled around his chest, tightening with every breath. "Minato-sensei, I failed you. Again." He didn't move, not right away, not even when the guards glanced his way with uncertainty. He just stood there, caught in the weight of what he hadn't said, what he should have said. By the time he finally turned away, the dust had long settled. His steps were slow, his frame heavy with silence. The third Hokage would be waiting, likely with questions, maybe even reprimands. Kakashi didn't argue with that. He knew he deserved them all. A few days later, the village nestled just beyond Konoha's outer forests was a modest place, small enough that its borders could be walked in under an hour, yet vibrant in a way that made it feel alive in every corner. Narrow cobblestone paths crisscrossed through the village like veins, guiding locals from home to market, smithy to shrine. The buildings, though time-worn, stood with humble dignity, walls painted in soft pastels now slightly faded by the sun, rooftops sloping like sleepy hats over wooden frames. The late afternoon sunlight draped over the village in golden sheets, casting long shadows and making the scent of grilled meat and fresh bread even more inviting. Stalls lined the main square, colorful cloth canopies fluttering in the breeze. Vendors called out with cheerful voices, their tables overflowing with ripe fruits, skewered yakitori, and hand-carved trinkets strung with crimson thread and beads of jade. Naruto walked alongside Jiraiya, his steps steady but cautious, his bright blue eyes constantly scanning the scenery. He couldn't help it. Years of life in Konoha had trained him to expect sneers, muttered insults, or, worst of all, those heavy, hateful silences. But here, no one was glaring, no one was whispering, no one pointed fingers like they'd just spotted a plague in human form. The villagers moved around him naturally, offering the occasional glance, curious, yes, but without malice. It felt strange, and in that strangeness, a flicker of something warm stirred in his chest. Is this what normal feels like? He wondered. No stares, no cold shoulders, just peace. His book bag bounced gently against his back with every step, the straps pressing into his shoulders, but it was a familiar sort of weight. He exhaled slowly, mostly out of habit, and tilted his head to glance at the tall man walking ahead of him. "Oi, Ero Sennin," he muttered, his voice low enough that it didn't carry to anyone else on the street. "You sure about this? I mean, aren't those, like, really expensive?" Jiraiya came to a stop just ahead, in front of a narrow little shop squeezed tightly between two larger buildings. Its wooden sign creaked lazily in the breeze, faded characters painted across the surface reading Yoshida's Armory. The glass windows were polished to a shine, and beyond them, the shop's walls gleamed with neatly arranged weaponry, rows of kunai and shuriken hung with care, glinting like ornaments under the warm light. Naruto stepped closer and caught sight of the display just behind the glass. His eyes widened slightly. There, resting on a velvet-lined shelf, was a pristine set of throwing knives, each blade perfectly balanced, their black hilts wrapped in lacquered red thread. It looked more like a collector's set than something you'd actually toss at a target. He let out a low whistle, half impressed, half resigned. That, he said, pointing at the set behind the glass. You know how much something like that would cost in Konoha. That's like a year's rent. No way I can afford something like that. He tried to laugh, but it came out hollow, more forced than amused. Jiraiya glanced at the display, then turned to Naruto with a quirked brow. What are you even talking about, brat? Naruto gestured more emphatically, frowning. It's gotta cost a fortune, right? I'm not made of money, you know. For a second, Jiraiya just stared at him. Then, with an exasperated sigh, he reached into his robe and pulled out a small, worn leather notebook. Flipping it open, he began scribbling something down with a piece of charcoal. You've been overpaying, he said flatly, eyes never leaving the page. Naruto blinked. The shopkeepers in Konoha, Jiraiya went on, glancing up at him with a knowing look, they've been ripping you off. Badly. Naruto stood frozen for a beat. Then he frowned, arms crossing defensively over his chest. TCH. Figures. His voice was bitter, and he didn't try to hide it. He'd always suspected it. How his ramen cost just a little more than anyone else's, how his gear was always second rate unless he really pressed for the good stuff. But to hear it confirmed like that, so casually, it stung more than he expected. Jiraiya closed the notebook and tucked it back into his robe. Don't worry about it, you're with me now. Things are gonna be different. Naruto looked at him then, really looked at him. The man's tone was light, almost careless, but the promise in his words was solid, unshakable, like the earth beneath their feet. Different, Naruto thought. I could get used to that. He turned back to the shop window, his gaze lingering on the weapons behind the glass, not with envy this time, but with something else. Hope. The door creaked softly as they stepped inside. The air was cooler here, laced with the clean scent of oiled steel and cedarwood. Polished weapon racks lined the walls, each carefully curated with deadly precision, rows of kunai and shuriken arranged by size, weight, and craftsmanship. The far wall held coils of ninja wire and shelves of scrolls sealed with red tags. There was a soft hum in the space, the kind of quiet that felt reverent, like a shrine for those who lived by the blade. Naruto's breath hitched slightly. So this is what a real armory looks like. He'd been in weapon shops before, sure. The ones in Konoha always made him feel like an unwanted stray, hovering by the cheap bins near the back while the shopkeepers watched him like he might steal something. Here, no one scowled. No one even batted an eye. Behind the counter stood a middle-aged man with a scar running down the side of his jaw, salt and pepper hair pulled into a neat knot. He glanced up as the door closed behind them and gave a nod, respectful, professional. Jiraiya-sama, the man greeted. Didn't expect you back so soon. Jiraiya raised a hand in casual acknowledgement. Had to pick up a few essentials for the kid. The man's eyes shifted to Naruto, scanning him with a craftsman's eye. No judgment, just an honest assessment. Naruto resisted the urge to shift under the scrutiny. The shopkeeper hummed thoughtfully. Got the look of someone who's finally getting proper training. Naruto blinked. That was not what he expected to hear. Jiraiya chuckled. You're not wrong. He's got potential. Just needed someone to stop treating him like a liability. Naruto glanced up at the older man, startled by the bluntness of that comment. But Jiraiya wasn't teasing. There was no grin on his face, just calm certainty. He really believes that, Naruto realized. The warmth that spread through his chest was quiet but powerful. The shopkeeper nodded once. Well then, let's get you outfitted. Jiraiya stepped aside and motioned for Naruto to take the lead. Go ahead, he said. 2 full sets. Kunai, shuriken, senbon. We'll need trap gear, tripwire, explosive tags, smoke pellets, and see if he's got beginner sealing kits too. Naruto hesitated, his feet rooted in place for half a second before he moved forward. His hands hovered over the display trays with reverence, eyes wide as he scanned the gear. Everything was top quality. Sharp edges, balanced weights, wrapped hilts. Not a chip or crack in sight. He reached for a kunai, his fingers brushing against the cool steel. It was heavier than the ones he'd used before, but in a good way. Solid. Real. Not the dull, hand-me-down junk he'd been using since the academy. Pick it up, the shopkeeper said simply. See how it sits in your hand. Naruto did. The weapon nestled in his grip like it belonged there. For a brief moment, he just stared at it, unmoving. I've never had gear this good before. He turned the blade over once, then gave it a slow, testing twirl between his fingers. No awkward drag, no uneven weight. This was something he could trust in a fight. Behind him, Jiraiya crossed his arms, watching with a satisfied nod. You're not going to be a half-baked shinobi anymore, Naruto. I'm going to make sure of it. Naruto looked up, expression unreadable. Then slowly, he smiled. Not the usual loud grin, but something quieter. Something real. Thanks, Ero Sennin. Don't get mushy on me, Jiraiya grumbled, though the smirk tugging at his lips betrayed him. Naruto turned back to the counter. So, how much is all this going to cost? Jiraiya slapped a pouch of Ryo onto the counter with a solid thunk. Already taken care of. Consider it an investment. Naruto blinked. Wait. What? You're buying it? Of course I am. You're my student now, remember? Jiraiya said matter-of-factly. It's about time someone actually invested in you. Naruto's throat tightened. He didn't know what to say. No one had ever said that before, not like this. Not without strings. Not without conditions. He looked back down at the kunai in his hand. Maybe, I really can start over. The sun had climbed higher, casting long beams of gold through the slowly parting clouds. The warmth settled over the cobbled village like a soft blanket, making the air smell of sun-warmed earth, sizzling meat from a nearby stall, and faint wood smoke curling from distant chimneys. The streets bustled with quiet life. Vendors called out gentle greetings, children darted between stalls with wooden swords, and somewhere, someone was playing a shamisen, its notes rising above the chatter like a lullaby. Naruto practically bounced at Jiraiya's side, a grin stretched wide across his face. The scroll now tucked under his arm held the sealed gear they had just purchased. Top-tier kunai, shuriken, and even a compact set of senbon tucked into a fitted case. Not to mention the tripwires, smoke pellets, and blank ceiling tags that made him feel more like a real shinobi than he had in years. He glanced over his shoulder at the shop they'd just exited, its modest wooden sign swinging gently in the breeze. Warm yellow light still spilled from its windows, as if it had left a piece of its glow inside him. Man, Naruto said, practically glowing, the prices here are way better than in Konoha. Maybe the taxes are lower or something. Jiraiya gave a short chuckle. Yeah, maybe. But his laugh didn't carry joy, just the hollow edge of someone who knew better. If only it were that simple. His gaze drifted ahead, narrowed slightly. He didn't answer Naruto's innocent theory, because the truth was heavier than the boy deserved to carry. He remembered the looks, the subtle sneers, the way merchants in Konoha would double the price when they saw blonde hair and blue eyes walk through the door. No one said it aloud, but Jiraiya knew. He'd seen it. Konoha still had people worth saving. That was undeniable, but the village had grown cracks, silent fractures filled with rot. Hatred wrapped in polite smiles. Dismissal disguised as discipline. And Naruto had borne the weight of all of it without even understanding why. Minato, Kushina, I should have done more, he thought, guilt biting deep. I should have been there sooner. Maybe then he wouldn't have had to grow up wondering why no one looked at him with kindness. Next to him, Naruto turned the scroll over in his hands, inspecting the red wax seal and admiring the tight calligraphy etched into the surface. His fingers traced the markings with something like reverence, like he couldn't quite believe it was his real gear. Gear that hadn't been thrown out or passed down or dumped in the bargain bin. And Jiraiya watched him quietly, anger curling hot beneath the calm of his expression. They never even gave him a chance. And he still smiles like this world never hurt him. Oi, Ero Sennin. Naruto's voice snapped him out of it, filled with excited energy. So, what's next? Jiraiya smirked, that familiar glint returning to his eyes. Next, he echoed, drawing out the word. We train. He paused dramatically, just long enough to watch Naruto's expression light up. Time to put that shiny new gear to use. Naruto's reaction was instant. His face split into a grin so wide it looked like it might break his cheeks, and he threw his fist into the air. Finally, he shouted, loud enough that a nearby old lady startled and dropped her basket of plums. I've been waiting for this forever. You've also been eating non-stop and sleeping in like a spoiled brat for 2 days, Jiraiya muttered with mock exasperation, though the amusement in his voice betrayed him. Don't think I didn't notice you sneaking those rice balls last night. Naruto rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. Hey, those don't count as a midnight snack if they're technically leftover breakfast, right? Jiraiya just shook his head. You've got stamina, kid, but you're still sloppy. That's what we're fixing starting today. Naruto fell into step beside him again, still grinning. So where are we going? Training ground, forest, mountain, volcano. Jiraiya gave him a sidelong glance. Someplace quieter. And no, not a volcano. Yet, Naruto's eyes sparkled with anticipation. You said yet. That means there's a volcano later, doesn't it? The older man sighed. Just try not to die before we get to the cool parts, all right? As they made their way out of the village center, the stone roads gave way to packed dirt trails that wound between trees and streams, and Naruto couldn't stop the excitement bubbling in his chest. This was it. New gear. Real training. Someone beside him who actually saw him. Not as a nuisance, not as a burden, but as a shinobi worth teaching. Yeah, he thought, gripping the scroll tighter. Later. Training field. The clearing sat nestled at the edge of the forest, surrounded by tall trees swaying gently in the breeze. Late afternoon sunlight poured through the gaps in the canopy, scattering patterns of gold and green across the grass. The cicadas hummed a lazy rhythm in the background, like nature's own metronome, keeping time as the wind stirred the high grass and rippled through the leaves overhead. It was peaceful, almost deceptively so. Jiraiya stood with his arms crossed at the far edge of the field, watching silently as Naruto moved into position. His posture was casual, but his eyes were sharp, tracking every twitch of movement with the precision of a seasoned shinobi. Naruto bounced on the balls of his feet, full of restless energy. His new gear was strapped neatly to his belt, and for the first time in years, maybe ever, he held real kunai. Not dented, not cracked, not the hand-me-downs from some bored chunin tossing their leftovers into the bargain bin. These were sleek, properly balanced, crafted to be wielded by someone who mattered. Naruto's fingers curled around the hilt with something close to reverence. This is what real ninja tools feel like, he thought, heart pounding. No excuses now. All right, brat, Jiraiya called out, his voice cutting through the quiet like a command and a challenge all at once. Show me what you've got. Kunai first, then shuriken. Naruto nodded, the grin falling from his face, replaced by focus. He reached down and, out of reflex, drew one of his older kunai. It was instinct, muscle memory. Something familiar. His fingers barely noticed the difference until the blade was already in hand. He narrowed his eyes at the wooden target across the clearing, tongue slipping out at the corner of his mouth as he lined up his shot. With a sharp exhale and a yell, he flung the kunai forward. It sailed through the air, then wobbled mid-flight, dipped awkwardly, and buried itself in the edge of the target with a dull thunk. Barely holding, Naruto frowned. He pulled another from his pouch, moving faster this time. He threw it before doubt could settle in. This one didn't even make it halfway. It hit the dirt with a clatter, rolling harmlessly through the grass. Naruto's shoulders tensed, his jaw clenched. Behind him, Jiraiya's brow furrowed. He uncrossed his arms and stepped forward, the dry grass crunching beneath his sandals. Something was wrong. Off, about the way those kunai had flown. It wasn't just Naruto's aim. The weight distribution was all wrong. The arc, the balance, none of it felt right. Hold up, he said, his voice firmer now. Crossing the clearing in a few long strides, he knelt beside the nearest target and pulled one of the embedded kunai free. The moment it left the wood, his suspicion was confirmed. The blade was a joke. Warped metal, dull edge, the handles wrapping frayed. The weight was uneven, the center off by just enough to throw everything out of alignment. It wasn't even a training weapon, it was a liability. He turned it over in the light, letting the sun catch the pitted steel. "You've been using these?" Jiraiya asked, his tone sharp now. Naruto scratched the back of his head, cheeks coloring faintly. "Yeah, I mean, they were the cheapest ones I could afford. I didn't really have a choice." Jiraiya didn't answer right away. His face darkened as he stared at the kunai, jaw tightening. "He's been training with garbage. Fighting with garbage. And no one said a damn thing. No teacher. No examiner. No instructor ever took a second look. They'd let him flounder, fight with tools that were meant to fail. They set him up to lose." Still silent, Jiraiya held the warped kunai between two fingers and threw. It twisted in the air, wobbled, and thudded into the target, off-center. He grabbed another and threw. Same result. Out of 5 throws, only 3 even made contact. None of them clean. He dropped the last one into the grass with a scowl. "These aren't kunai," he muttered. "They're scrap metal with a death wish." Naruto winced, rubbing his neck. "I didn't really know any better," he admitted, voice low. "I just thought I had throwing. Figured if I practiced more, I'd get the hang of it." Jiraiya turned to him, expression serious now. "It wasn't your fault." Naruto blinked. "You didn't fail the tools, Naruto," Jiraiya said firmly. "The tools, and the people who gave them to you, failed you." The words hit harder than they should have. Naruto looked down at his hands, the same ones that had been cut and blistered trying to make junk work like it was worth something. He'd always blamed himself, always thought it was just him not being good enough. Never once had he thought that maybe, he was doing the best he could with what little he had, and it just wasn't fair. Jiraiya let out a long breath, the fire in his voice cooling slightly. "Now that you've got the real thing, let's see what you can do." Naruto glanced at the scroll on his hip, the one filled with the gear they'd bought just that morning. He reached for it slowly, unsealing the scroll with practiced fingers. A small puff of smoke, and there they were, perfect kunai, shining under the sun like they'd been waiting for him. This time, when he picked one up, it felt like an extension of his arm. Balanced, solid, right. He squared his stance again, eyes narrowing as he fixed on the target. "All right," he muttered, voice steady. "One more time." Naruto hesitated, drawing a slow breath through his nose. The clearing had gone still again, the only sound the rustle of leaves and the faint whisper of wind threading through the trees. It felt like everything had quieted, just for this moment. His fingers curled around the pouch at his waist, and he drew one of the new kunai. The steel gleamed in the sunlight, bright and unapologetic, catching the light like it wanted to be thrown. Unlike the others, the ones that had dulled and bent with every failed attempt, This felt alive in his palm. Balanced. Sure. He stepped forward, narrowed his eyes on the bullseye nailed to the tree across the clearing, and exhaled. Then he moved. The kunai sliced through the air with a clean whistle and struck dead center, burying itself in the exact middle of the target with a sharp, satisfying thunk. Naruto blinked, stunned. Whoa. Before the awe had time to settle, he reached for another, and another, fingers moving faster now, every throw guided by instinct rather than hesitation. Steel flew, one after the other, each kunai carving the air with clean precision. There was no wobble, no uneven drag, just perfect flight, perfect balance. By the time he was finished, 10 kunai stood buried in the targets like an artist's brushstrokes. Not scattered, not clumped, centered, dead on. Jiraiya didn't speak, just watched, arms crossed and mouth drawn in a thoughtful line. Naruto wasn't just doing well. He was nailing it. And then came the shuriken. Naruto moved on, grabbing the slim stars of steel, fingers now sure in their grip. His first throw landed true, followed by a second, then a third, each one weaving through the air like it had a mind of its own. By the end, 10 shurikens sat embedded in the wooden boards, each one lodged with crisp, even spacing. Precise. Clean. Naruto lowered his hand, chest rising and falling as he stared at the targets in disbelief. Did I really just do that? He couldn't tear his eyes away. These weren't just lucky shots. They were good. He was good. All this time, it hadn't been him. Jiraiya nodded slowly, a quiet pride glinting behind the usual gruffness in his eyes. See, he said, voice low but certain. Told you. Those bastards back in Konoha were ripping you off. Naruto looked down. In his left hand, still curled tight, was one of the old kunai, the rusted, uneven ones he'd used since he was 8. The hilt, once familiar, now felt wrong. Too light, untrustworthy. It was the same blade that had bounced off tree trunks, slid out of his grip mid-practice, missed targets by meters. How many times had he thought it was his fault? How many times had he stayed late at the training field, trying to fix himself, throwing until his fingers bled, convinced he just wasn't good enough? The realization hit like a slap. So, he said quietly, voice barely more than a breath, it wasn't just me. Jiraiya stepped beside him, his shadow falling long and steady across the grass. His hand landed on Naruto's shoulder, firm, solid, real. No, brat, he said, gaze steady as stone. It wasn't just you. Naruto stared down at the kunai in his hand for a moment longer. Then, without a word, he loosened his grip. The weapon slipped from his fingers and dropped into the grass with a soft thud, forgotten. Dead weight, finally put to rest. He didn't need it anymore. Jiraiya gave his shoulder a final squeeze before stepping back with a breath. The moment lingered, heavy in its honesty, but then, as always, it passed. Come on, he said, rolling his shoulders with a grin that didn't quite hide the emotion behind it. We're not done yet. Naruto turned toward him, something brighter burning behind his eyes now, like the flame that had been smothered for years was finally getting air. Jiraiya smirked. Time to see what you've got in taijutsu. Naruto grinned back, cracking his knuckles with a renewed sense of confidence. Oh, you're on, Arrow Sennin. They moved to the center of the clearing, the grass already flattened beneath their pacing. It was a wide space, ringed by tall trees that filtered the fading sunlight through their leaves, casting dappled shadows across the open field. The cicadas had quieted, replaced by the occasional chirp of birds returning to their nests. Jiraiya stood opposite Naruto, arms folded loosely across his chest. His stance looked casual, but the way his eyes locked onto Naruto told a different story. He wasn't just watching, he was evaluating. All right, he said, tone calm but expectant. Show me the standard academy stance. Naruto shifted, blinking once before stepping into position, or at least, what he thought was the right one. Feet spread, arms raised, knees bent, jaw set. He held it for barely a second before Jiraiya's frown deepened. The boy's center of gravity was off, his weight favoring one side without realizing it. His arms were too wide, elbows unguarded, and his hands were open, an open invitation for someone to break his guard. His knees were bent too much, robbing him of speed, and his whole form felt more like a vague impression of a fighting stance than the real thing. Jiraiya rubbed the bridge of his nose with a tired sigh. "Kid," he muttered, "this isn't a stance. It's a cry for help." Naruto immediately deflated, arms dropping to his sides as his shoulders hunched. I tried," he mumbled. "Back at the academy, I'd watch the others and copy them, but it always felt weird. Off." His voice dropped even lower, almost a whisper. "And whenever I did try, people just laughed. Said I looked stupid." The words lingered in the air like smoke, light, but choking all the same. He looked away, eyes focused somewhere near the ground. "So I stopped. Just started fighting however I wanted. Didn't think it mattered." Jiraiya's expression didn't soften, but something behind his eyes shifted, like an old wound pulling taut. He'd expected Naruto to be rough around the edges, sure. But this, no foundation, no form, not even the most basic fundamentals taught correctly. What the hell were they doing in that damn village? "All right," Jiraiya said, exhaling. "Sit down." Naruto blinked. "Huh, sit," Jiraiya repeated, already reaching into his coat. Still a little unsure, Naruto dropped to the ground, crossing his legs and waiting. The grass tickled his calves, cool and damp from the shaded earth beneath. He watched as Jiraiya pulled out a tightly sealed scroll and, with a practiced flick of his wrist, unfurled it across the grass in front of them. Lines of ink spread out like flowing calligraphy, elegant, almost artistic. Silhouettes of figures moved through taijutsu forms, their poses captured mid-motion in swirling brushstrokes. Arrows detailed shifts in weight and positioning, while margin notes, some written hastily, others neatly, offered instructions and corrections in bold, fluid strokes. "This," Jiraiya said, tapping a figure in one of the poses, "is called the humming style." Naruto leaned in, squinting. Humming, a taijutsu form built on rhythm, fluid movement, and deceptive strikes, Jiraiya explained, voice steady. "It's adaptable, fast, built to mislead your opponent with timing and unpredictability. The academy doesn't teach it. Hell, most jonin wouldn't recognize it if it hit them in the jaw. Minato had crafted it himself." Naruto tilted his head, eyes following the graceful shapes drawn on the scroll. It looked different, less rigid than the academy stuff. It flowed like a dance. Or maybe a song. "Wait," Naruto asked, brow furrowing. "You said this is what Minato used." Jiraiya's hand paused over the parchment. For a moment, he didn't respond. The breeze picked up slightly, rustling the paper and tousling his hair. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "Yeah," he said, "Minato was someone important." There was weight behind those words. Heavy, final, like a door had been quietly shut. Naruto didn't press. He didn't know who Minato was, only that Jiraiya said his name like it mattered. Like it hurt. That was enough for now. The older man cleared his throat, shaking off whatever emotion had crept into his expression. He rolled his shoulders, returning to the here and now. "Anyway," Jiraiya said, forcing lightness back into his tone, "this form isn't easy. You're gonna trip over your own feet at first. Maybe even fall on your face." Naruto grinned, perking up again. "Yeah, sounds like fun. Don't get," Jiraiya warned, though the corner of his mouth twitched into a faint smirk. "You screw up the timing, and someone'll sweep your legs faster than you can blink." Naruto pushed himself to his feet, fire rekindled behind his eyes. Then I'll just learn to blink faster. Jiraiya chuckled, folding up the scroll and tucking it back into his coat. Alright, smartass. Let's see how much rhythm you've got. Naruto stood tall. Well, as tall as 5 foot nothing and full of determination could look, his brows drawn in tight concentration. Across from him, Jiraiya took his place with the smug air of a man about to enjoy himself way too much. All right, Jiraiya said, cracking his knuckles. The humming style is all about rhythm, fluidity, and misdirection. You need to move like you're dancing. Naruto gave him a blank look. Like, dancing. Yeah, Jiraiya said, shrugging. If you can't sway your hips, you're going to get decked. Naruto blinked, face wrinkling in horror. I don't sway. You do now, Jiraiya replied with an evil grin. Naruto groaned but stepped into the first stance shown on the scroll. Left foot forward, knees slightly bent, arms raised. He tried to flow into the next motion, a sideways pivot with a half step and whump. His foot caught on a stray root. He stumbled forward and flailed for balance, pinwheeling his arms like a baby duck on ice before collapsing in a heap. From behind his crossed arms, Jiraiya snorted. You call that rhythm? He laughed. You've got the grace of a drunk tanuki. Naruto groaned from the dirt. This is your fault. Who designs a fighting style that makes you move like a backup dancer? Minato did. Okay, but why? Jiraiya just smiled like a proud dad watching his kid fail a school recital, amused and vaguely disappointed. Because he didn't need brute strength. He used speed, angles, and timing. You can't just charge in yelling and throwing punches forever. Naruto rolled over onto his back, arms splayed in defeat. But yelling and punching is, like, my whole thing. Jiraiya walked over and offered a hand. Naruto took it, half expecting to be pulled up gently. Instead, Jiraiya yanked him into a spin and let go mid-pivot. Now that's more like it. The Sannin cackled as Naruto stumbled again, barely catching his footing. You're enjoying this way too much, Naruto grumbled, wobbling back into a defensive stance. Damn right I am. Come on, again. Step, pivot, twist, not like that. Don't plant your heel, you'll slip. Naruto's legs slid out from under him, and he went down for the third time. A puff of dust rose around him like a sad little cloud of failure. I hate this style, he mumbled from the grass. Jiraiya leaned down just enough to grin at him. The style hates you too. But you'll get there. You're supposed to be encouraging me, you know, Naruto muttered. I am encouraging you to stop flopping around like a carp and move like you've got bones in your legs. Naruto pushed himself up to one knee, scowling. You're the worst teacher ever. And yet, here we are. Jiraiya stepped back. Now get up, brat. You're gonna practice this until the trees start humming back at you. Naruto grumbled under his breath, something about curvy old men and stupid dancing, but rose anyway. His legs ached, his pride was bruised, and he had grass stuck to his cheek, but he got back into position, stubborn fire lighting up behind his eyes. Because despite the flops and fumbles, somewhere between the spins and faceplants, he kind of liked it. It was fast, sneaky, it had a rhythm to it, like moving in sync with his heartbeat. And if it was something Minato had used, then he'd damn well figure it out, even if it did make him look like he was in a bad musical. Naruto in a breath, his body aching from the dozen, or was it 2 dozen, failed attempts to master the footwork. His hair was full of leaves, his knees were scraped, and his pride had taken more hits than his body. But he hadn't quit. He was stubborn like that. This time, he narrowed his stance, recalling the flow Jiraiya had shown him earlier. Instead of forcing the movement, he let it happen, let his body feel the rhythm instead of overthinking every motion. He stepped forward with a pivot, twisted at the hip, and rolled his foot just right. And it clicked. His body moved like water bending with the current, one step flowing into the next. His weight shifted naturally, and his momentum turned with him instead of against him. Jiraiya's eyes widened, just slightly. There it is. Before Naruto even realized it, he had spun around behind where Jiraiya had been standing a second earlier, his movements unpredictable, fluid. A full rotation, sharp and low, ended with him slamming his palm forward in a textbook opening strike, one meant to create space. Jiraiya, caught between surprise and habit, pivoted just in time to block it with his forearm, but Naruto's motion had been clean. Real. He hadn't just flailed into a lucky hit. He meant to move like that. The Sannin blinked, and for a flicker of a second, it wasn't Naruto he saw. It was a younger man, golden-haired and faster than thought. A shinobi with eyes like burning daylight and a smile like a storm. Minato. Jiraiya snapped back to the present just in time to feel Naruto's fist slam into his chest. Not hard enough to do damage, but solid. Precise. He took the hit, boots digging into the earth as the force pushed him back half a step. Naruto froze, eyes wide. Jiraiya looked down at the spot where the blow had landed, then up at the boy. A beat passed. Then he smirked. "Well," he said, cracking his neck, "would you look at that?" Naruto blinked, still not sure if he was about to get yelled at or praised. Was that good?" Jiraiya's smirk widened. "You just earned yourself a real fight." The next second, he blurred forward. Naruto barely had time to throw his arms up before Jiraiya's legs swept toward him from the left. He twisted with a panicked yelp, narrowly ducking under the strike, the wind of it brushing past his hair. He staggered back, feet scrambling to find footing. Jiraiya pressed the advantage. He came in fast, feinting a jab before spinning low. Naruto jumped, flipped backward, and landed sloppily, but upright. His pulse thundered in his ears. "You said we were practicing." Naruto shouted. "This is practice," Jiraiya called back, lunging again. Naruto barely managed to block the next strike, their forearms colliding with a crack of impact. He twisted his hips, trying to remember the pivot step. He stepped wide, rolled low, and let the rhythm take over. His body responded before his brain could catch up. He moved under Jiraiya's arm and shoved with both hands. The Sannin slid back, boots skidding through the grass. Jiraiya's grin was fierce now. "There it is, brat. That's the humming style." Naruto breathed hard, sweat running down his temple, adrenaline lighting him up from the inside. He wasn't just throwing punches anymore. He was dancing. He surged forward again, fists up, and the clearing came alive with movement. Strike for strike, block for block. Jiraiya moved with the calm, seasoned grace of a master, but Naruto was learning, adjusting, pushing back harder with each exchange. The rhythm was rough, clumsy, but it was there, and Jiraiya couldn't stop the rush in his chest. The thrill, the pride, the ache of recognition as Naruto came at him with Minato's footwork and Kushina's fire burning in his eyes. Their feet tore across the flattened grass as the spar escalated, Naruto ducking, pivoting, blocking, moving with a rough but growing rhythm. Jiraiya tested him with every step, jabs that came faster, footwork that cornered him, kicks that forced Naruto to react or get laid out. But Naruto was adapting. His breath came in sharp bursts, his limbs aching, but his mind was focused, locked into the rhythm of the fight. His instincts burned brighter with every clash. Another strike came. Jiraiya's elbow angled for his ribs. Naruto twisted away, letting the blow graze air, then dropped low and rolled to the side, his sandals skidding across the grass. He caught himself mid-spin, planted his feet, and surged back toward Jiraiya like a spring released. A left feint, a high right. Jiraiya blocked both, but only just. His grin widened. The brat was learning fast. But Naruto wasn't finished. Jiraiya stepped into a counterattack. Classic weight shift, leading with his back foot, and that was the moment Naruto saw it. His eyes flicked down. Jiraiya's weight was leaning too far forward. Unbalanced. Naruto didn't even think. His body moved before his brain did, acting on instinct, on something that felt familiar, like a whisper passed down through blood. He used Jiraiya's momentum against him, sidestepped with a pivot, mirrored the angle in reverse, and pulled. Jiraiya's balance gave out. The older man stumbled, not fully off his feet, but enough that he exposed his left side. Naruto's arm swung out, and his fist connected, right in Jiraiya's ribs. The sound of the impact rang out across the field, sharp, clean, undeniable. Jiraiya staggered back a step, not hurt, but surprised. Naruto froze. His eyes went wide. I hit you. He blurted, stunned. I actually hit you. He looked down at his fist like it had just cast a jutsu on its own. Jiraiya stood straight, rubbing his ribs, a familiar smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. Huh, that was almost exactly like what Minato used to do. Naruto blinked, still processing, until he saw Jiraiya shift his stance again. Wait, too late. In that brief window of shock, Naruto had dropped his guard. And Jiraiya punished it. With one fluid motion, he stepped in, grabbed Naruto's wrist, and swept his legs from under him in a blur of motion. Gah! Naruto hit the ground with a soft thud, air leaving his lungs in a surprised wheeze. The sky spun above him as he lay flat on his back, dazed, blinking up through the rustling leaves. Jiraiya stood over him, grinning. First rule of taijutsu, kid, he said, offering a hand down. Don't stop moving just because you landed a hit. Naruto groaned, lifting his head. That's a dumb rule. Yeah, Jiraiya agreed, but now you'll remember it. He pulled Naruto up with one firm tug. The boy wobbled, still catching his breath, but his face was flushed with more than just exertion. There was something else there, something fierce. He'd landed a real hit. Not luck, not charity, skill, and that flicker of stunned disbelief had given way to something new. Pride. Again, Naruto asked, cracking his neck. Jiraiya arched a brow. Now you're asking for it. Naruto grinned, swaying slightly in his stance. Yeah, he said, I think I kinda like this dance. No, we will begin with something new. The clearing had quieted again. The sun dipped lower through the trees, casting longer shadows across the flattened grass. The light had softened into a golden hue, wrapping the world in warmth, but Jiraiya's mood was anything but calm. He pulled a thin strip of parchment from a small pouch at his hip. It was a chakra sensing tag, etched with delicate, curling black lines and layered with precise fuinjutsu seals that shimmered faintly when caught in the sun. All right, next test, he said, stepping forward with a neutral tone. Hold still. Naruto blinked, still catching his breath from their spar, but obediently stood up straight. Jiraiya pressed the tag gently to Naruto's forehead. The seals flared for a moment, activating with a quiet pulse of chakra. We'll start with the basics, he said. Academy-grade techniques. Transformation first. Naruto cracked his knuckles and grinned. Easy. He puffed out his cheeks, gathering chakra, and with a practiced clap of his hands, a poof of smoke burst outward. When it cleared, Jiraiya found himself staring at himself. The replica standing before him wasn't just close. It was exact. Long white hair, red-lined eyes, the same posture, the same smirk, even the subtle fold of his arms was mirrored perfectly. Jiraiya blinked once, then again. Slowly, he stepped forward, eyes narrowing at the chakra tag still stuck to the doppelganger's forehead. The readings were stable. More than stable, balanced, fully formed chakra distribution across the entire body. This isn't an illusion, he muttered. This is a full body transformation. Chakra stable, structure reinforced across the entire frame. He leaned in. Not a crack, not a shimmer, no flicker of chakra misalignment. This isn't even academy level. The transformation popped away in a puff of smoke. Naruto stood there grinning, hands on his hips like he'd just performed a magic trick. Pretty cool, right? Jiraiya's expression didn't change. This is B rank level, he said flatly. At least, do you know how hard it is to make a transformation that holds under scrutiny? Let alone moves properly. Naruto tilted his head. I just practiced a lot. I guess. He shrugged. People always said I was weird. But not, like, wow, your jutsu breaks the rules weird. Jiraiya pinched the bridge of his nose. This kid, never mind, he muttered, waving it off. Replacement next. Naruto nodded and vanished before the sentence had even finished. There was a blur of movement, a faint pop, and in his place stood a log. Clean cut, sharp seal mark, textbook. Jiraiya turned, scanning the clearing. Naruto reappeared 10 meters away, waving casually. Yo, Jiraiya grunted, pulling the tag from the log and checking the readout. His brow twitched. You used 25 times more chakra than necessary, he said under his breath, the paper crinkling slightly in his hand. He turned back toward Naruto, eyes narrowing. Who the hell told you to do it like that? Naruto scratched the back of his head, looking sheepish. One of the academy chunin. They said if I pumped in a ton of chakra, it wouldn't fail. So I kinda, always did that. Jiraiya's hand twitched at his side. Of course they did. He closed his eyes and briefly imagined tossing a nameless, faceless academy instructor off the Hokage monument. Maybe twice. They told a Jinchuriki with chakra like a damn tidal wave, to overload a precision-based technique. Were they stupid? No, that was too generous. They were dangerous. He said nothing. His jaw just tightened as he let out a slow, controlled breath through his nose. Last one, he said, voice a little sharper now. Clone jutsu. The standard one. Naruto groaned. That one's lame. Do it anyway. Fine, fine. He brought his hands together, focusing. His chakra swirled, unstable at first, then it surged outward. Poof. 2 clones popped into existence beside him. Both immediately keeled over. One had no legs. The other looked like it had seen a ghost and then become one. Jiraiya stared. What the hell is that? Naruto winced. Yeah, that one's never worked. They always end up like that. The half-formed clone twitched pitifully before vanishing. Jiraiya looked at the tag again. The chakra flow was ridiculous. Too much at first, then none at all. An uncontrolled surge followed by an instant drop. He exhaled, scratching the back of his head. Let me guess. No one ever told you why it wasn't working. Nope, Naruto said cheerfully. They just failed me a bunch and said I was hopeless. Wonderful, Jiraiya muttered, rubbing his temples. A B rank transformation. A perfectly executed replacement, overloaded to the point of absurdity. And a clone jutsu so broken it looked like the result of a chakra-based horror story. Jiraiya sighed, muttering under his breath, you've been training with crap tools, crap instruction, and sheer dumb luck, and somehow, you're still standing. He looked at Naruto, who was now poking one of the fallen clone's arms like it was a science experiment. I'm amazed you're not dead. Naruto gave him a wide grin. I'm too stubborn to die. Jiraiya huffed. No kidding. He looked at the chakra tag one last time, then pocketed it. The damage is deeper than I thought, he mused grimly. But, the potential's even greater. All right, he said, clapping his hands once. That's enough testing. We've got our work cut out for us. Naruto raised a brow. So, do I pass? Jiraiya smirked. You pass, Barely. Now I get to tear you apart and put you back together properly. Naruto pumped his fist. Heck yeah. Wait, should I be worried? Yes. The afternoon light had cooled into amber, stretching shadows long across the clearing. The breeze whispered through the treetops, gentle now, as if the forest itself had quieted in respect. A hush settled between them, the kind that only came after a hard day's training and a harder truth. Jiraiya knelt beneath a tree at the edge of the clearing, his cloak shifting slightly with the breeze. From deep within its folds, he pulled out a small, worn notebook. The leather cover was scarred with scratches from years of travel, stains from ink, weather, and the occasional spilled sake. The pages inside were filled with notes, tactics, secrets, and regrets. With a flick of his wrist, he opened to a fresh page. The pen moved smoothly, though each stroke carried weight, not just from the ink, but from the conviction behind it. Investigate and eliminate anyone who sabotaged Naruto. Ensure Kakashi gets the verbal beating of a lifetime from Sensei. Find a way to pay these bastards back for everything they've done. The words bled into the parchment with silent fury. Sharp, controlled, intentional. Jiraiya stared at the list for a moment, the ink drying under the golden light. This wasn't just neglect, it was coordinated, quiet, intentional. A child doesn't end up trained like that by accident. Someone had let him fail. Made sure he would. And he, Jiraiya, the Toad Sage, the goddamn gallant, had let it all happen from a distance, believing the village would do right by Minato's son. His throat tightened. Minato, Kushina, if you saw this now. The bitterness in his chest curled into something darker. It settled low, heavy like stones in his gut, smoldering beneath his ribs. He hadn't just failed Naruto. He'd failed his students. But just as the weight of it began to pull him inward, spiraling into guilt too old and too sharp to voice, a voice cut through the air like sunlight slicing fog. Hey, Ero Sennin. Jiraiya blinked. He looked up. Naruto was standing in the middle of the clearing, grinning from ear to ear, arms raised high like he'd just beaten a boss in a video game. There, stuck to his forehead, fluttering slightly with every breath, was a single, stubborn green leaf. I stuck the leaf, Naruto declared, beaming. The grin he wore was wide, unfiltered, and full of light. Joy, simple and pure. And it hit Jiraiya like a punch to the chest. Because after everything, the isolation, the neglect, the failures no one took responsibility for, Naruto still smiled like the world hadn't tried to break him. Still believed in himself. Still tried. Jiraiya's grip on the notebook loosened. His expression softened, the hard lines around his mouth easing just a touch. Good job, brat, he said, rising to his feet, his voice low but laced with something gentler now. Let's call it a day. Dinner's on me. Naruto let out a victorious whoop, throwing a triumphant fist into the air like he'd just won the Chunin exams. Yes, ramen, here I come. He bolted ahead, leaf still stuck to his forehead, laughing as he went. Jiraiya chuckled under his breath, tucking the notebook back into his cloak as he followed. The forest around them hummed softly with the sounds of nature settling into evening, cicadas buzzing, leaves rustling, the warm chirp of birds in the distance. Shadows stretched across the trail as the sun began its descent, painting everything in gold and rose. Jiraiya glanced down at Naruto, who had slowed to walk beside him, the scroll of training supplies slung over his back, dirt smudged on his cheeks, and a smile still dancing on his lips. He's been through hell, Jiraiya thought, watching the boy out of the corner of his eye. And he still manages to look at the world like it hasn't crushed him. It made something tight curl in his chest, heart awe, heart guilt, and something painfully close to pride. Hey, Naruto said suddenly, glancing up. You think I'll be able to do that clone thing right one day? Jiraiya smirked. If you don't blow yourself up first. Hey, and just like that, the silence broke again, with laughter echoing through the trees as master and student walked toward the fading sun, side by side.